All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are looking at a truly wild trajectory. From trolls to treason, we're tracing the evolution of hacktivism. And look, I'm not just talking about some minor website defacements here. We're tracking a massive, highly consequential shift, going from internet pranksters causing global chaos just for laughs, all the way to modern, state-sponsored cognitive warfare. The digital landscape has fundamentally changed, right? And by the end of this, you'll see exactly how the hackers of yesterday paved the way for the invisible wars we're fighting today. Now, to truly understand where we are today, we really have to look back at the absolute chaos of 2011. There was this hacker group called LulzSec, and they went on an unprecedented hacking spree. Just look at this timeline. May 7th, they breached Fox.com. May 29th, they hacked PBS and planted this wild fake news story claiming the rapper Tupac was still alive in New Zealand. Then, June 2nd, they stole over 1 million user passwords from Sony Pictures. They were relentlessly targeting major networks, right? But then, June 26th, the group just abruptly disbands. Just like that. You know, the sheer audacity of these early hackers is perfectly captured in what they said right after that Sony hack. They essentially blamed Sony. They stated every bit of data we took wasn't encrypted. Sony stored over 1 million passwords in plain text. They were asking for it. I mean, wow. Their primary motive was what they proudly called anarchic lulz, basically hacking purely for the entertainment value of it, while, sure, exposing genuinely terrible corporate security at the same time. They saw themselves as digital vigilantes, but let's be real, they were mostly just in it for the thrill. And the craziest part? They did all of this in an incredibly short window. 50. That is the number of days LulzSec was officially active. Just 50 days. In that tiny window of anarchic lulz, this relatively small group amassed hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers and literally dominated global headlines. They hit corporations, the NHS in the UK, the US Senate. And why? Honestly, just because they could. They engineered an absolute media circus. But as you might guess with these high-profile sprees, the fun came to a screeching halt. It brings up a huge question. What happens when the glorious leader flips? LulzSec's presumed leader was Hector Xavier Monsegur, much better known online by his handle Sabu. Now, the internet thought he was this untouchable digital mastermind. But in reality, federal agents had quietly tracked him down and arrested him in a New York City housing project. And this is where the story takes a massive, massive twist. 24 hours from hacker to informant. That's literally all it took. Facing decades of potential prison time and desperately wanting to stay home to care for his imprisoned aunt's 2 young kids, Sabu flipped in under a day. The so-called untouchable hacktivist secretly became a highly active, heavily supervised FBI informant. And the wildest part is, for a long time, nobody on the internet had a clue. So what did Sabu's FBI operation actually look like? Well, operating straight out of an FBI building, he wasn't just passively handing over chat logs. Far from it. First, under federal supervision, he informed on his confidants in the broader anonymous collective. Second, he aggressively positioned himself as the ringleader of a brand new faction called Anti-Sec. And third, he used his massive online clout to attract and entrap other hackers into this new group, essentially building a giant honeypot to collect evidence against his own peers while they planned new attacks. Now, as you can imagine, this aggressive strategy sparked massive debates about the line between law enforcement and outright entrapment. Prominent hacker Jeremy Hammond, who did eventually go to jail, later revealed this. Sabu presented me with a list of targets, including many foreign government sites, and encouraged me to break into their computer systems. Just think about that for a second. An FBI informant actively directing hacktivists to breach foreign government infrastructure. It is a staggering thought. So, with Sabu's betrayal finally exposed and sweeping arrests taking down key players like Hammond and Ryan Cleary around 2011 and 2012, the golden age of lulz was over. But that brings us to a really vital question for our digital age. Did hacktivism actually die with LulzSec? Where did all that digital protest energy go after those dramatic arrests? And how has the whole landscape transformed since the days of online pranks? To figure that out, let's dive into some comprehensive research published by Orange Cyber Defense. They map out the evolution of hacktivism across 3 distinct eras. First, you have the digital utopia era of the 80s and 90s, driven by those early hacker ethics. Then comes the anti-establishment era, which is what we just talked about with Anonymous and LulzSec fighting governments and corporations. But today we've entered the 3rd phase, the establishment era. And as we're going to see, this current era is actually deeply concerning. When you look at old hacktivism versus modern hacktivism, the shift is fundamental. And frankly, it's pretty chilling. Old hacktivism was inherently oppositional, right? Anti-government, fiercely independent, creating chaos either to send a message or just for the fun of it. But modern hacktivism, it's heavily state-aligned. Today's groups are deeply embedded in geopolitical conflicts. Instead of fighting the establishment, they're operating in ways that directly support specific state objectives. So the rebellious mask is still there, but the puppeteer has completely changed.
And that brings us to the new weapon of choice, something called cognitive warfare. So today's state-aligned hackers aren't just trying to break servers or steal credit cards anymore. Instead, their cyber operations are explicitly oriented towards shaping public opinion. They rely on fear, uncertainty, doubt, and manipulation. Their real goal is psychological. It's all about breaking the public's trust in their own societal institutions. The technical damage? That's really just a means to achieve a psychological end. Because the main goal is now psychological, the targets have naturally changed. Modern hacktivist groups coordinate massive campaigns to hit highly symbolic infrastructure. We're talking about telecommunications, energy grids, media ecosystems, and crucially, democratic elections. They aren't targeting these sectors just because they happen to be technically vulnerable. They hit them because disrupting a power grid or an election portal instantly amplifies societal fear. It perfectly creates this narrative of institutional failure.
The contrast, when you look at the goal then versus the goal now, is incredibly stark. We've literally gone from teenagers stealing plain text passwords just to publicly embarrass a giant like Sony to highly sophisticated actors actively attacking voting portals. We've seen this recently in countries like France and the UK. The goal now is to actively erode democratic confidence. It is a massive, massive escalation, going from corporate embarrassment to threatening the very integrity of national governance. If you break down the data on the modern hacktivism spectrum today, true grassroots digital protest is actually really low. It's just a tiny sliver of what we call hacktivism. The term itself has essentially become a contested label, like a highly convenient smokescreen. What we're really seeing is this massive spike in high-level state-sponsored influence operations, which kind of medium blends with pure cybercrime. Honestly, the whole activism angle is often just a cover story, a way to legitimize or distract from outright geopolitical cyber warfare. As Orange Cyber Defense puts it, hacktivism is no longer only oppositional. It is, in many cases, supportive of state objectives. And that's the reality of it. These modern actors are incredibly media savvy. They are constantly monitoring news coverage and using platforms like Telegram to push deliberate disinformation. They're basically ensuring that every single cyber attack they execute fuels a continuous, real-world cycle of geopolitical tension. They are acting as direct extensions of state power. Which leaves us with one final provocative question. If modern hacktivism is just a mask for state operations, who is really behind the screen today? The days of lulzsack and 50-day digital prank sprees are long, long gone. So, as we navigate our digital democracy today, we really have to ask ourselves, when the next major hack dominates the headlines and some anonymous group claims responsibility for a cause, are we actually dealing with grassroots activists fighting for a better world? Or are we simply witnessing a nation-state fighting a silent, psychological war from behind a digital mask?